Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. There are places in this world that defy explanation, corners of our reality where the fabric of the rational tears open to reveal the festering darkness underneath. We like to believe that our homes are our sanctuaries, fortresses of safety where the chaos of the outside world cannot touch us. But what happens when the danger is not outside, but already waiting within the walls? What happens when the history of a location bleeds through into the present, demanding a debt be paid in fear and blood? Today we turn our gaze to a small, unassuming white house in Atchison, Kansas. It sits quietly on a hill overlooking the Missouri River, blending in with the other turn-of-the-century homes that line the streets of this historic railroad town. But 508 North 2nd Street is not like the others. It is a place where the innocent laughter of a child masks a predatory malevolence. It is a place where skepticism is stripped away by physical violence. This is the story of the Sallie House, a case file that remains one of the most documented, controversial, and terrifying hauntings in American history. To truly understand the nightmare that unfolded in the early 1990s, we must first understand the setting. Atchison is a town steeped in the past, a place where the Victorian era still clings to the architecture and the atmosphere. The house at 508 North 2nd Street was built between 1867 and 1871. For decades, it was home to the Finney family. Dr. Charles Finney, a prominent physician, lived and worked there. In the late 19th century, then it was common for doctors to operate their practices out of the front rooms of their family homes. The front parlor was a waiting room. The examination room was just down the hall. Patients would come and go, bringing their ailments, their pain, and sometimes their final breaths into the domestic sphere of the Finney household. It is from this era that the legend is born. The historical records of Atchison confirm Dr. Finney's residence, but the oral history provides the gruesome context. The story goes that a frantic mother brought her 6-year-old daughter to Dr. Finney's door. The child was in agony, suffering from a bursting appendix. In those days, time was the enemy. There was no time to transport her to a hospital. Dr. Finney had to operate immediately. However, the anesthesia had not yet taken full effect. As the doctor made the first incision, the little girl screamed in horrific pain and shock. Her heart gave out on the table. She died terrified, in agony, and confused, looking at the man who was supposed to save her. Her name, according to the lore that would surface a century later, was Sallie. For decades, the house stood as a silent witness to this tragedy. Tenants came and went. There were whispers, rumors of cold spots and strange feelings, but nothing that warranted national attention. That changed on December 31st, 1992. Tony and Debra Pickman were a young couple, full of hope and looking for a fresh start. They were expecting their first child. When they walked through the door of the rental property on North 2nd Street, they didn't see a house of horrors. They saw affordable rent, plenty of space for a nursery, like in a quiet neighborhood. Tony was a pragmatic man, a skeptic who worked for a shipping company. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in what he could see, touch, and explain. Debra was more open-minded, perhaps more sensitive, but neither of them was prepared for the siege that was about to begin. The activity started slowly, almost playfully. It was the kind of phenomena that could easily be dismissed as the quirks of an old house. Lights would flicker, the television would change channels on its own, Pictures hanging on the walls would be found tilted or lying face down on the floor. The family dog, a creature of pure instinct, was the first to sense that they were not alone. The dog would growl at empty corners, hackles raised, barking ferociously at the air in the nursery. Eventually, when the animal refused to enter the nursery altogether. As the weeks turned into months, the phenomena escalated from mischievous to intelligent. Tony would come home from work to find the baby's toys arranged in a circle in the middle of the floor. Stuffed animals that had been put away in the toy box were found sitting on the bed, facing the door, as if waiting for someone to enter. At this point, the activity seemed centered around the nursery and the unborn child. It felt like the spirit of a child, lonely and seeking a playmate. The Pickmans, though unsettled, tried to rationalize it. They even gave the entity a name, assuming it was the little girl from the legends. They called her Sallie, but the birth of their son, Taylor, seemed to act as a catalyst. The arrival of a male child and the presence of Tony, like a dominant male figure in the house, triggered a shift in the hauntings dynamic. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy. The air would grow so cold that their breath would mist, even with the heating cranked up high. The smell of ozone and burnt matches began to permeate the hallways. Then, the attacks began. This is what separates the Sallie House from the vast majority of ghost stories. Most hauntings are residual, replays of past events, or interactive in harmless ways. The entity in the Sallie House was physical, and it was violent. And it had a specific target, Tony Pickman. It started with scratches. Tony would feel a sudden, sharp burning sensation on his arm or his back. When he looked, he would find fresh, red welts rising on his skin. These weren't random abrasions. They were distinct sets of 3 or 4 parallel lines, looking unmistakably like fingernail scratches. But they were too deep, appearing too quickly to be self-inflicted or accidental. One evening, while Tony was holding his infant son, he felt a searing pain across his back. He handed the baby to Debra and pulled up his shirt. There, documented in photographs that would later baffle investigators, were deep, bloody scratches raked down his spine. The psychological horror of being attacked while holding his newborn child shattered Tony's skepticism. He realized that whatever was in the house had the power to hurt him, and by extension, could hurt his son. The violence escalated. On another occasion, Tony felt a burning sensation on his wrist. As he and Debra watched in horror, bloody scratches materialized on his skin in real time, as if an invisible claw was being dragged across his flesh. But there was no one near him. His hands were visible. This was a direct, intelligent assault. The Pickmans sought help. They reached out to paranormal investigators, psychics, and even the media. The popular television show Sightings took an interest in the case. This brings us to a crucial point in the documentation of the Sallie House. Unlike folklore that relies on hearsay from 100 years ago, the events at the Sallie House were occurring under the scrutiny of cameras and third-party witnesses. When the Sightings crew arrived, the activity didn't hide. In fact, it seemed to perform for the audience. During one investigation, a psychic medium entered the nursery. She immediately became overwhelmed with a sensation of panic and pain in her abdomen. She described a little girl, terrified of a man in a white coat. She described the smell of antiseptic and the feeling of cold metal. This seemed to corroborate the story of the botched appendectomy. The medium sensed that the spirit of Sallie was confused, stuck in the moment of her death, and perhaps lashing out at Tony because he represented a male authority figure, much like the doctor who had operated on her. However, as the investigation deepened, a darker theory emerged. The attacks on Tony were becoming too vicious, too calculated for a confused 6-year-old ghost. Tony was being shoved, scratched, and on one occasion, pushed down the stairs. Fires began to break out in the house. Small, inexplicable fires would ignite in the nursery or the basement. This was not the behavior of a lost child. This was the behavior of something malevolent. Whereas investigators began to suspect that Sallie was a mask. In demonology and paranormal research, it is a known tactic for inhuman entities to mimic the form of a child. A child lowers the defenses of the living. We are programmed to protect children, to feel sympathy for them. By appearing as a little girl or manifesting phenomena associated with a child, like toys moving or giggling sounds, the entity invites the victims to open themselves up. They grant the entity permission to stay, to interact, feeding it energy. The Pickmans had welcomed Sallie. They had spoken to her. They had acknowledged her. And in doing so, they may have unknowingly invited a demonic presence to latch onto their family. The focus on Tony supported this theory. Demonic entities often target the head of the household. They were aiming to break the family unit by destroying the protector. If Tony could be broken, driven out, or terrified into submission, the rest of the family would be vulnerable. The documented evidence from this period is chilling. There are audio recordings known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, captured inside the house. In the nursery, where the feeling of dread was strongest, recorders picked up the sound of a growling voice, distinct from the high-pitched giggles heard earlier. One EVP captured a voice whispering, "Here's the doctor," followed by a scream. Was this a replay of the surgery, or a mockery of it? The physical toll on Tony Pickman became unbearable. He was running a fever of fear constantly. He couldn't sleep. He would wake up with bruises he couldn't explain. The final straw came when the attacks threatened the safety of Taylor. The nursery, once a place of hope, had become a cold storage of dread. The toys moving on their own were no longer cute. They were threats. The Pickmans realized they could not win this war. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't touch, but one that could very definitely touch them. In 1994, the Pickmans moved out of 508 North 2nd Street. They left the house behind, but the house did not become dormant. This is often where a ghost story ends, with the family escaping and the credits rolling. But for the Sallie House, the departure of the Pickmans was only the end of the first chapter. The house sat empty, yet it remained incredibly loud. Subsequent owners and tenants reported the same phenomena, but few stayed as long as the Pickmans. The house eventually became a focal point for the paranormal research community. It stands empty today, owned by a local who allows investigations. This has allowed for a unique longitudinal study of the haunting. Over the last 30 years, hundreds of investigators have walked through those doors. And the consistency of the reports is what makes the Sallie House so terrifying within the context of the Nocturnal Ledger. Men who enter the house continue to be the primary targets. There are countless reports from male investigators being scratched. They describe a sensation of intense heat, followed by the feeling of liquid running down their skin. When they check, they find 3 long, parallel scratches. Why 3? In religious demonology, the number 3 is often used as a mockery of the Holy Trinity. It is a signature, as a sign of insult to the divine. One particularly harrowing account comes from a team of researchers who spent the night in the basement. The basement of the Sallie House is a dark, oppressive space, with limestone walls and a dirt floor in sections. It is believed to be the heart of the darker energy. The team set up a grid of laser lights to detect movement. In the dead of night, they watched as the laser grid was broken by a shadow mass that was not human-shaped. It was amorphous, shifting and crawling along the floor. At the same time, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. One of the investigators, a man, was suddenly thrown backward against the wall by an unseen force, and he was left with a bruise in the shape of a handprint on his chest. A handprint that was far too large to belong to a 6-year-old girl. The question that plagues researchers is the nature of the entity. Is it really the ghost of the girl who died on the table? Some theories suggest that the girl, Sallie, does exist there, but she is a prisoner. She is the bait used by a stronger, darker entity to lure people in. The Sallie phenomena, the moving toys, the giggles, are the lure. The scratches, the fires, the shoves. That is the trap snapping shut. Another theory dives into the geography of Atchison itself. The town is built along the Missouri River, a massive body of moving water. In paranormal theory, running water is a conductor of energy. Additionally, the limestone bedrock of Kansas is believed by some to act as a battery and storing the emotional resonance of past events. Could the sheer trauma of the surgeries performed in that house, the pain and the death, have imprinted on the environment so strongly that it created a non-human intelligence, a tulpa, or a thought form born of agony? Let's look closer at the Sallie origin story. Skeptics and historians have dug into the records. While Dr. Finney did live there and did operate a clinic, there is no death certificate for a girl named Sallie dying of appendicitis at that address. There was, however, a girl named Agnes Finney who lived in the house. Some speculate that Sallie might be a nickname or a misremembered detail that has become reality through collective belief. But if there was no Sallie, then what were the Pickmans talking to? If the little girl never existed, and then the entity that befriended Debra and played with the baby's toys was a lie from the very beginning. A fabrication created by something ancient to gain entry into their lives. The attacks on Tony Pickman offer the most disturbing insight. Why him? It wasn't just that he was a man. It was that he was a skeptic. He denied the existence of the spirit. There is a school of thought that suggests these entities feed on fear, but they also feed on conflict. By attacking the skeptic, the entity created a massive amount of negative emotional energy in the house. It created tension between Tony and Debra. It created an atmosphere of terror. This energy is food. The entity wasn't just hurting Tony, it was harvesting him. Witness testimonies from the last decade described the atmosphere of the house as shifting. Sometimes it feels dormant. Also, you can walk through the parlor and feel nothing but the dust. But then, the shift happens. It's often described as a change in air pressure, like the feeling in your ears when you dive deep underwater. The silence becomes heavy. Then come the sounds. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. The sound of a child humming a tune that has no melody. One investigator recorded an EVP in the kitchen that is particularly chilling. The investigator asked, Why are you here? The voice that replied was not a child's voice. It was a guttural, raspy whisper that said, "I want." It didn't say what it wanted. It just expressed a state of endless, ravenous desire. I want. The visual evidence accumulated over the years includes photographs of strange mists, orbs, and shadow figures. But the most compelling evidence remains the physical scars on the bodies of the people who visit. There are websites and forums dedicated to the Sallie House where victims share photos of their scratches. The similarity is undeniable. The placement, the depth, the pattern. It is the signature of a single artist working on human canvas. Psychologists who have reviewed the case of the Pickmans point to the extreme stress they were under. A new baby, a new house, financial pressures. Skeptics argue that the poltergeist activity could be a manifestation of telekinetic energy from the living agents, specifically Debra, who is going through the hormonal changes of pregnancy and postpartum. This is known as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. But this theory fails to explain why the physical attacks were directed solely at Tony, or why they continued to happen to strangers long after the Pickmans left. Poltergeist activity generated by a living person usually stops when that person leaves. The Sallie House did not stop. In recent years, the house has been the subject of cleansing rituals. Priests and shamans have attempted to drive the spirits out. They use sage, holy water, and prayer. During these rituals, the activity often spikes. Doors slam shut. Candles are blown out by phantom winds. It is as if the entity is mocking the attempt to evict it. It claims ownership. It was there before the Pickmans, and it intends to be there long after the current fascination fades. The nursery remains the epicenter. Even today, visitors report that the room feels incredibly sad. People often burst into tears for no reason upon entering the room. It is a crushing wave of grief. Is this the residual emotion of the mother who lost her daughter? Or is it a psychic weapon used to disorient the living? The layout of the house contributes to the unease. The stairs are steep and narrow. The hallways are tight. It forces you to be close to the walls, close to the spaces where the shadows gather. When you stand in the master bedroom, you can look down the hall to the nursery. The Pickmans described waking up at night and seeing a dark shape standing in the nursery doorway, just watching them. Not doing anything, just observing. That passivity is almost more terrifying than the violence. It implies intelligence. It implies that the entity is studying its prey, learning their routines, their fears, their breaking points. Now, we must also consider the documented incidents involving the town's locals. Neighbors have reported seeing a light on in the nursery window late at night, even when the house was known to be empty and the power cut. They have reported seeing the figure of a small girl standing in the front window, looking out at the street. When police investigate, they find the house locked, secure, and empty. These are not people looking for fame. These are neighbors who just want to feel safe in their own homes, disturbed by the anomaly next door. The Sallie House serves as a grim reminder that the Nocturnal Ledger is never truly balanced. We want to believe that there are rules, that if we are good people, if we pay our rent and love our children, we will be safe. But the story of the Pickmans proves that the paranormal does not discriminate, and it does not care about your skepticism. In fact, it might take your skepticism as a challenge. The scratching, the burning, the 3 welts. These are the physical receipts of a transaction with the unknown. The Sallie House stands as a monument to the unexplained, a physical structure housing a metaphysical nightmare. It challenges our understanding of life and death. If a child's spirit can be twisted into a demon, or if a demon can wear a child's face, what does that say about the safety of the afterlife? As we close this file, remember the layout of your own home. Remember the creaks and the groans of the settling wood. Are they just the house cooling down for the night? Or is it something shifting its weight, waiting for you to turn out the light? The Pickmans escaped, but they carry the scars, both physical and mental, to this day. And the house remains on North 2nd Street. White paint peeling, sitting in silence. But it is not empty. It is never empty. This has been an entry in the Nocturnal Ledger. The darkness is always accounting for us. Sleep well, if you can.